In our reading from 1 Peter 4-5 a couple of days ago, we talked about how just because God has acted powerfully to save us and bring us to Himself, it doesn't mean that we can expect from here on out that things are going to be easy or comfortable. In fact, in this life, it's quite the opposite, because we have an enemy who hates the things of God, and he will do whatever he can to try to keep us from living joyfully and fruitfully as God's people. And when he does, the only thing we can do is to surrender our lives into the hands of a loving and powerful God, to obey what he has given us to do, and to simply trust him to be God. That's exactly what happens to the people of Judah when they return after many years of exile in Babylon. And we see that story in today's reading from Ezra 1-5. Remember that Jeremiah had prophesied specifically that the exile in Babylon would be 70 years. But then as time went on and that 70-year timeline approached, there was no sign that they were going to be leaving Babylon anytime soon. You see that in Psalm 126 when it says, "When the Lord brought back the captives from Zion, we were like people who were living in a dream." In other words, it was too good to be true, because they had lost hope that they were actually ever going to see Jerusalem again. But then out of nowhere, King Cyrus of Persia captures Babylon, and within the first year of his reign, the Lord moves in his heart and led him to decree that the people of Judah should return home and start rebuilding the temple of their God. Not only that, he gave back all the gold and all the articles that had been stolen from the temple years ago, and he gave them other resources and gifts to take with them as well. God accomplishes the deliverance of his people by moving in the heart of an idol-worshiping king who doesn't even know him. It's so important to remember the deliverance of God, to look back and remember how he saved us so powerfully and at just the right time, because when we can remember that, it enables us to trust our lives into his hands today and for the future. Chapter 3, we see that soon after they arrived back in Jerusalem, they built an altar to the Lord to offer burnt offerings, which, remember, were for the purpose of making atonement for sins and also for renewing their covenant relationship with the Lord. And they also celebrated the Feast of Booths, which was a celebration looking back to how the Lord had acted powerfully to deliver them from slavery in Egypt, and to celebrate how he was faithful to them in all of the years of wandering in the wilderness. What an appropriate way to begin their life as God's people soon after he's delivered them from exile and been so faithful to journey with them as they came back home. Well, not longer after they returned, they began to rebuild the temple again. And as soon as their enemies saw what was happening, they began to oppose them. At first, they pretended to be friendly with Judah. They said, "Hey, we'll come and we'll work beside you. We'll help you rebuild the temple." But Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, said, "No, this is a task that is only for the people of God." So their enemies try something else. They write to Artaxerxes, who is now ruling in Persia, and they accuse Judah of rebelling against him by rebuilding the temple of their God. They say, "Look at their history. They've done this all along." And so the king orders them to stop the work. And they stop the work. But some years later, when Darius was now king in Persia, the Lord sends the prophets Haggai and Zechariah to tell the people to finish the work on the temple. And they get to work right away in obedience to him. But when the people around here, the governor of Persia for that region comes and questions them, and they respond by telling him all about the decree that Cyrus had made years ago. So he writes to King Darius to tell him to check the archives to see if this decree really exists. But the people of Judah didn't wait. They just obeyed, and they got to work on the temple, and they trusted the Lord to deal with the opposition. And the call to God's people today is the same as the call to God's people then. The Lord acted powerfully through Christ to deliver us and bring us to himself. And he is building us together as his temple, the place of his presence. And we have an enemy who, through the enemies on the ground, oppose God's work and oppose God's people because they don't want us to live as his people in the midst of their world. So when we encounter this opposition, what do? We remember how Christ has powerfully accomplished our salvation. We celebrate and remember how God has been so faithful to us as we journey through this life. We obey him in everything that he's given us to do. And in all of it, we surrender to him and we simply trust him to be God.